Hey guys, before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Maybe you're lying down or maybe you're drifting off with your headphones in. Wherever you are, close your eyes for a second and imagine the sound of the sea. Not the crashing kind, but the slow, breathing kind. The kind that sounds like it's remembering something. Tonight, we're going to talk about pirates, but not the kind you're thinking of. Forget the parrots, the golden earrings, the tall ships slicing through the waves. Because what if I told you most pirates didn't even have ships? Strange, right? A pirate without a ship sounds like a knight without armor. And yet, for most of them, that was the truth. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? I always wonder that when I tell these stories. Are you somewhere warm? Or is it raining outside your window right now? Maybe it's the middle of the night and the only light in your room is from your screen. Anyway, let's set sail. Or perhaps, let's walk the shore. Our story begins not on a deck, but on the docks, in a forgotten port at the edge of the Caribbean. The air there was heavy, thick with salt and sugar, with the smell of tar and wet rope. Ships groaned as they swayed in their moorings, their hulls scarred by storms. And among the sailors, thieves, and merchants, there was one man watching them all, Thomas Gray. Thomas wasn't a pirate yet. In fact, he wasn't much of anything. Just a sailor who'd lost his last ship to debt and bad luck. He'd spent weeks wandering between taverns, trading stories for rum, and sleeping under the hulls of boats that weren't his. He used to say that the sea called to him, but now it only whispered from a distance. It was in those lonely days that he first heard the rumor that somewhere along the coast, a group of men had started calling themselves Brothers of the Tide. They didn't have a ship, only a stolen rowboat and a promise that one day they'd have more. People laughed at them. But Thomas didn't, because here's the thing. In the golden age of piracy, most pirates started exactly like that. Broke, desperate, and without a single sail to their name. You see, real pirate ships weren't built. They were taken. A true pirate's ship was a story of theft upon theft, layered like old paint on wood. And so, the myth of the Grand Pirate Fleet was mostly just that, a myth. Still, Thomas could never shake the image. A man standing at the edge of the world, staring at the horizon, dreaming of freedom he couldn't yet touch. He said the sea had a sound to it, one that never left his mind. A deep, endless rhythm, like a giant heart beating just below the waves. At night, the harbor came alive in whispers. Sailors trading lies, merchants guarding secrets, women with laughter sharper than knives. But among those voices, one name started to appear again and again: Captain Ward. Some said he'd once commanded a royal ship and had turned rogue. Others claimed he was just a ghost story made up to scare the Navy. Thomas didn't know which was true, but one thing was certain: wherever Captain Ward went, ships disappeared. And maybe that's where the first spark came from. The idea that a man didn't need a ship to be a pirate. Maybe all he needed was the will to take one. Thomas began spending his nights by the old pier, staring out over the black water. The waves licked at the stones like tongues of glass, reflecting the lantern light. He could hear voices from the tavern behind him. Laughter, shouts, music, but it all felt far away. The sea, though, the sea was always close. Sometimes, when the wind turned just right, he swore he could hear the faint hum of something vast out there. Not a storm, not a ship, but something older. Like the ocean itself was breathing, waiting. And maybe it was, because the world was changing. Empires were rising and falling. Gold was flooding out of the new world. And men like Thomas were being left behind. Men who had given their lives to the sea, only to find themselves stranded on dry land. And when men like that have nothing left to lose, that's when piracy is born. So when a stranger approached him one night, tall, quiet, with a scar across his jaw, and said, "We're looking for a man who knows the tide," Thomas didn't hesitate. He didn't ask where they were going. He didn't ask what they'd do. He simply followed. After all, the sea was calling again. And this time, it was calling for him. The stranger's name was Elias Ward, though whether he was the same Captain Ward from the stories, no one could ever quite tell. He didn't speak much, but when he did, the others listened. There was something about him, something carved by salt and sleepless nights. Thomas followed him down a narrow alley behind the docks. The moon hung low, caught in a tangle of masts and ropes, and somewhere a gull cried like a warning. The alley ended at a crumbling warehouse, its windows blacked out. Ward pushed the door open, and inside, in the flickering light of a lantern, Thomas saw them. Men without ships. A dozen of them, maybe more. All of them sailors once. You could tell by the way they moved, even on land, their feet shifting slightly, as if balancing on invisible waves. Some had lost fingers. Some had scars like maps across their faces. There was a woman, too, sitting apart from the rest, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. She didn't look up. No one here had a ship or money or much hope, but they had something stronger than all that, the ache of the sea inside them. Ward spoke quietly, like a priest at confession. "There's a brig anchored 2 nights south of here. Belongs to a merchant named Powell. He's carrying sugar, rum, maybe silver. The crew sleeps drunk. If we take it, it's ours." No one moved. The words hung in the air like smoke. Take it, as if it were that simple. Thomas felt his pulse thrum with something he hadn't felt in months. Possibility. He looked at the faces around him. No uniforms, no flags, no oaths. Just men, worn down to their bones, staring at one another in the dim glow, trying to remember what courage felt like. That night, they made their plan. Not a grand naval scheme, just a desperate whisper of one. They'd borrow a fisherman's sloop, row under cover of fog, and climb the brig's hull before dawn. If they succeeded, they'd have their first ship. If they failed, well, the sea had room for more ghosts. But something about it felt right. I suppose it always does, in the beginning. They left before the tide turned, the water black and still as oil. Every creak of would sounded like thunder. The small boat rocked with their breathing. Thomas could smell the salt, the tar, the faint sweetness of rum from the barrels along the shore. No one spoke. Even Ward kept silent, eyes fixed ahead. When the silhouette of the brig appeared, Thomas thought it looked impossibly large, a dark beast sleeping on the waves. Lanterns swayed along her sides, tiny golden eyes. Somewhere above, a rope groaned softly in the wind. The sloop drifted closer. Then, with slow, careful motion, Ward climbed the first rope ladder, his boots slick with dew. One by one, the others followed. The sea below them whispered and hissed, as if amused. Thomas's hands trembled as he climbed. Every breath felt too loud. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, steady as the waves against the hull. When he reached the top, the deck stretched before him, empty, silent. A single lantern swung gently by the helm. Ward moved first, his shadow long and lean. He opened the captain's cabin. A snore echoed from inside. Then, a quick flash of steel and silence again. When Thomas stepped inside, he saw the merchant captain slumped over his desk, a quill still in hand, ink spilled like blood across the parchment. Ward wiped the blade clean, as calm as if he'd cut an apple. "Lower the flag," he said quietly. And just like that, the brig was theirs. But here's the strange part. When the sun rose hours later, and the red light hit the sails, it didn't feel like victory. The crew moved about in hushed awe, afraid to breathe too loudly. They had a ship now, yes, but she wasn't really theirs. Not yet. The name painted across her stern read Providence. A godly name for a godless act. Ward ordered it scraped off that very morning. "We'll rename her," he said. "A ship only becomes real when she's renamed in blood." Thomas didn't ask whose. They worked in silence, cleaning, scrubbing, learning the rhythm of the deck. Some were sailors again for the first time in years. Others were already drunk before noon. The woman with the knife stood at the bow, staring out at the horizon. Her name was Maren. When Thomas asked what she was thinking, she said only, "Freedom doesn't float. It sinks unless you keep rowing." And he never forgot that. As the day wore on, the sea turned a deep, impossible blue. The wind picked up, and the Providence, though they'd soon call her something else, began to move. For the first time, Thomas felt the deck sway under him not as an enemy, but as a promise. Ward stood at the wheel, his coat snapping in the wind. "Men without ships," he said, almost smiling. "Not anymore." And though the crew cheered, Thomas noticed something in Ward's eyes. Not triumph, but calculation. Like a man who'd found the right key and was already thinking about the next lock. Because the sea never gives without taking something back. And soon it would start collecting its debt. When the Providence, or what was left of her name, finally reached open water, the crew should have felt free. The horizon stretched endless before them, the wind warm and alive. But freedom, as Thomas would later say, doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly, like mist, and it can vanish just as quietly. They had no flag to raise, no port to call home, and nowhere to sell what little they'd taken. A pirate ship without a patron was like a story without an ending. And so, after only 2 weeks at sea, Captain Ward turned the wheel toward the island of Tortuga. Tortuga wasn't much to look at from a distance, just a green smudge of jungle and rock. But as they drew closer, The air thickened with noise. Drums, shouts, laughter, and the smell of smoke and rum. The place was alive, pulsing with all the parts of the world no empire wanted to see. The harbor was packed with ships, though few would have passed as respectable. Sails patched with old linens, flags stitched from stolen coats, cannons rusted and mismatched. Every crew claimed a different allegiance, some French, some English, some loyal to no one at all. But on Tortuga, everyone spoke the same language, trade. They anchored at dusk. The light hit the water like fire. Ward gave his orders calmly, as he always did. We sell the sugar. We keep the rum. Don't speak my name. Don't start fights you can't finish. Then he looked at Thomas. And stay close. This place eats men faster than the sea. On shore, Tortuga felt less like a town and more like a dream built out of broken things. The streets were mud and coral. The houses leaned against each other like drunkards, held up by rope and hope. Everywhere, someone was singing, or shouting, or sleeping in a puddle. And at the center of it all stood the widow's breath. It wasn't a ship, not anymore. Once it had been a proud galleon. Now it was a tavern, anchored permanently in the shallows, its hull filled with lantern light and music. Sailors called it the Floating Tavern. Every plank smelled of spilled rum and smoke. It was said that if you listened closely, you could still hear the sea inside it. Thomas followed Ward up the gangplank, the boards creaking under their boots. Inside, the air was thick with voices. A man played a fiddle in the corner. Another tossed dice against the wall. Women in faded silks laughed from the stairway, and somewhere, someone was crying softly into a tankard. Maren found a seat by the window, eyes scanning the room. "This is where ships are born," she murmured. Thomas didn't understand until he saw it. The quiet deals happening between the noise. A sailor selling a map drawn on a scrap of cloth. Another trading his share of loot for a new pistol. And in the back, a man with an eye patch counting coins with both hands, though one of them was wooden. Ward disappeared into the crowd. He always did that, vanished when you least expected, only to return with something valuable or dangerous, usually both. Thomas sat near the bar. The wood was sticky, the air thick with sweat and smoke. Behind the counter, an old woman with silver hair poured rum into a cracked glass. She looked at him, her eyes pale as sea glass. "First time?" she asked. He nodded. "Then remember this," she said. "No one owns a ship here. Not really. You borrow it from the sea, you borrow the crew from hunger, and you borrow your luck from death. The trick is to keep borrowing longer than the others." Thomas thought she was drunk, but her words lingered long after she turned away. Later, Ward returned with a sealed letter and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "We've got a buyer," he said, "and a job." Maren frowned. "A buyer for sugar?" Ward shook his head. "For silence." He didn't explain what he meant, and no one asked. But that night, as they left the widow's breath, Thomas glanced back at the glowing hull. The waves lapped against it, soft and slow, as if the ship still dreamed of moving. Some said the tavern had once belonged to a pirate queen, a woman who'd traded her life for immortality. Others said it was cursed, that every man who drank there would one day drown. Thomas didn't believe in curses. Not yet, but as he stepped back into the night, the air shifted. The sea was restless, the tide pulling harder than before, and somewhere behind him, a single lantern on the widow's breath flickered out, leaving the deck in darkness. He didn't notice, not then, but the sea notices everything. The morning after they left the widow's breath, the sky was the color of old pewter. Clouds hung low, moving slow and heavy, as if the world itself hadn't decided whether it meant to rain. The Providence creaked at her moorings while Ward leaned over the rail, staring into the gray water below. They'd sold the sugar, and they'd earned enough coin to keep the crew fed for a while. Yet something about Ward's silence made Thomas uneasy. He wasn't a man who celebrated victories, even small ones. Maren joined Thomas by the foremast, tying the last of the new rigging. "You see how he looks at the water?" she whispered. "He's listening for something. Every captain does, before the sea takes notice of them." Thomas didn't know what she meant, but he would soon. Ward finally turned, his coat damp from the mist. "We need a compass," he said simply. "A proper one, not a toy." There was only one place to buy a compass in Tortuga, a cramped little shop behind the church that hadn't seen a sermon in years. The sign above the door had faded to nothing, but everyone knew it by the smell of oil and salt that seeped through its cracks. Inside, the air was cool and dark. Shelves were lined with instruments that gleamed like secrets. Astrolabes, sextants, hourglasses, and rows of compasses. Some brass, some wood, each one whispering its own direction. The shopkeeper was a thin man with hands too clean for the island. He greeted Ward with a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. "Looking for direction, Captain?" Ward's expression didn't change. "I'm looking for truth." The man chuckled softly, pulling a small box from beneath the counter. Inside lay a compass unlike any Thomas had ever seen. Its glass was cracked, its needle a strange black iron. Around the rim were markings not of letters, but symbols, circles, lines, and what looked like tiny suns. "This one," the shopkeeper said, "doesn't point north. It points home." Ward studied it for a long moment, then nodded. "How much?" The man's smile widened. "That depends on what you think your home is worth." Ward's hand went to his belt. He laid down 5 silver coins and the knife from his boot. The shopkeeper didn't touch them. Not enough. Thomas felt something cold stir in his stomach. "What else do you want?" he asked. The man's eyes moved to him. "Just a promise," he said softly. "Every sailor who owns this compass swears never to use it to run away. It always finds what you truly seek, and that isn't always where you want to go." Ward took the compass without another word. Outside, the rain had started to fall, thin and steady, like a whispering curtain. Back on the ship, Thomas watched him turn the compass over in his hand. The needle trembled, spinning once, twice, then stopped, not pointing north but east toward the open sea. "East?" Thomas asked. "What's there?" Ward smiled faintly. "Debt," he said, "and that was that. They sailed before dusk, the rain turning to fog as the island faded behind them. The sea around Tortuga was a strange color, green near the shallows, black at the edge. The compass needle didn't waver, and neither did Ward's expression. By the second night, they were far from any known chart. The stars came out clear and sharp, but the wind had an odd taste to it, metallic and sweet. Maren stood beside Thomas, watching the waves. "You know," she said, "some sailors believe compasses lie when they cross cursed water. They say the needle isn't drawn to the pole. It's drawn to what lives beneath it." Thomas laughed, quietly. "And what would that be?" She shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some say it's the soul of the sea. Others say it's the weight of every ship that's ever sunk." Thomas tried not to look at the compass again, but he couldn't help it. The needle had shifted slightly, now pointing a fraction north, quivering like it was thinking. Later that night, as the crew slept, he woke to find Ward still at the helm. The lantern light cast his face in pieces. "It doesn't point east anymore," Ward said softly, as if to himself. "Now it points somewhere else." Thomas stepped closer. "Where?" Ward looked up, and his eyes caught the glow of the compass like twin shards of glass. "To what's owed?" he whispered. The next morning, the sun rose blood orange over a sea so still it looked like glass. The compass needle was motionless, and far ahead, at the edge of the world, a dark shape broke the surface. Something half shrouded in mist, unmoving, waiting. Maren's voice came from beside him. "Maybe it's land." Ward's hand tightened on the wheel. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe it's what the compass wanted us to find." No one spoke after that. The wind had died. The sea had gone silent. The Providence drifted closer, slow and careful. And somewhere below them, deep in the black water, something enormous turned once, then disappeared. Thomas felt it in his bones, the way a man feels thunder before it hits. The sea had started to listen. The thing in the mist turned out not to be land, nor monster, but a ship barely. When the fog tore open, they saw her drifting without sails, her masts like broken bones against the pale sky. The hull was scorched in places, black streaks crawling down her sides as though she had been kissed by fire and then abandoned to heal on her own. Ward slowed the Providence to a crawl. "No flag," he said. "No lights." They circled once, every man leaning over the rail to listen. Nothing but the hush of water sliding along wood. Even the gulls kept their distance. Maren spat overboard. Dead ship. Thomas wasn't so sure. Something about her, the stillness maybe, felt alive in a different way. Like a sleeping animal that might wake if you breathed too loudly. Ward gave the order to board. Half the crew muttered prayers as they climbed the ropes, their boots thudding softly on a deck powdered with salt. It smelled of burned pitch and old rain. Barrels lay split, canvas curled from the heat, ropes turned to ash. Yet there was no sign of a fight. No blood, no bodies. Below deck they found the logbook, edges curled and blackened. Thomas brushed the soot away until he could read the words written in a careful, trembling hand. March 14th, The wind has gone wrong again. Compass turns against itself. Crew whisper that we're being followed, though there's nothing but water behind us. The captain says it's the tide remembering. Nothing after that. Ward closed the book, his thumb pressed to the burned corner. "She's ours now," he said quietly. "Borrowed until the sea asks for her back." They spent the day salvaging what they could: rope, food, a single cannon that still looked serviceable. The woman who'd written the logbook was never found. When the sun dropped, Ward stood on the quarterdeck and looked from his old ship to the new one. "We'll keep them both," he decided. "The Providence and this ghost together. One for luck, one for memory." Thomas didn't ask which was which. That night the wind returned, sharp and sudden. The sails filled, and both ships moved as if pulled by invisible strings. The burned vessel creaked behind them, tethered by a single rope, her hull whispering against the waves. Some of the crew swore they heard her humming, a low sound, almost like singing, almost like mourning. For days they drifted east, the compass needle twitching nervously as if unsure what to believe. Ward named the captured hulk borrowed waves. It was fitting. None of them had built her, none of them deserved her, yet she carried them forward anyway. Maren grew restless. "Two ships mean two shadows," she said. "Twice the luck or twice the curse." Ward smiled without humor. "Luck doesn't come in twos." By the fourth night, the fog had returned, heavy and wet. Thomas couldn't see past the bow. He stood watch alone, listening. Somewhere behind him the borrowed waves groaned, and he thought he heard footsteps crossing her deck. "Slow, careful," he called out, thinking it was one of the crew, but the sound stopped. Only the water answered. When morning came, the rope between the ships had been cut clean through. Not frayed, cut. They searched the horizon until noon, but the borrowed waves was gone, swallowed by the same mist that had delivered her. The compass spun wildly all day, unable to choose a direction. Ward didn't speak. He only turned the wheel toward nowhere in particular, eyes narrowed against the glare. "Maybe she found her crew again," Maren said softly. "Maybe she found what we were supposed to," Thomas answered, though he didn't believe it. By evening, the sea smoothed itself into glass. The compass stilled once more, pointing north now, steady as if nothing had happened. Ward set it down beside the logbook they had taken from the burned ship. "Borrowed," he said. "Everything we have borrowed, even the waves." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the faint rhythm of wood against water, far off in the dark, like the echo of another ship following them just out of sight. He thought of the compass and of what the shopkeeper had said. It points home. But whose home? Days passed with no sign of the lost ship. The Providence moved under skies the color of tarnished brass, the wind lazy, the sails breathing in and out like lungs that had grown tired. Ward kept his eyes on the horizon and his silence intact. Even Maren, who was never quiet for long, had stopped asking where they were going. It was Thomas who finally spoke. "What are we now?" Ward looked at him as though the question had been waiting on his tongue too. "Sailors," he said. Same as ever. But it wasn't true. Sailors had flags. Flags meant home, law, wages. Theirs meant nothing now. The Providence sailed bare, her mast naked against the endless gray. That night, the crew gathered on deck. The talk was restless, the kind that smells of rum and fear. Someone said they needed a banner. Another laughed that a flag wouldn't make them any richer or less wanted. A man named Briggs tore a strip from his shirt and tied it to the rail. "There," he said. "Now we're official." The joke drew thin laughter, but Ward didn't smile. He studied the rag of cloth fluttering in the breeze. "Every ship that's ever gone to war flies a story," he said. "A flag isn't a sign, it's a promise." He went below deck, returned with an old sail cut into a square, and spread it across the planks. "If we fly one," he said, "it shouldn't be a king's. It shouldn't be anyone's." The crew watched as he poured lampblack into a bowl, stirring it with seawater until it turned thick as tar. Maren fetched a brush, and Ward handed it to Thomas. "Go on," he said. "Paint what we are." Thomas hesitated. He wasn't a man of symbols, only of ropes and knots. The brush felt foreign in his hand. He thought of the burned ship, of the compass, of the silence that had followed them since the fog. He dipped the brush and drew the first thing that came to him. A skull. Not grinning, not fierce, just empty, watching. The others leaned closer. "Needs bones," Briggs muttered. Someone added crossed ribs beneath it. Another a pair of eyes shaped like stars. When they were done, the cloth looked less like a threat and more like a memory. Something worn, something already old. Ward hung it from the mast himself. The wind caught it at once, snapping it open against the sky. Black on gray. No bright colors, no gold fringe. Just darkness, carved with white. Thomas stared at it, feeling a pull in his chest he couldn't name. "What do we call it?" he asked. Ward turned the compass over in his palm. "Nothing," he said. "The sea will name it if it wants to." And that's how it began. Later, sailors in other ports would whisper about a flag with a skull that watched instead of laughed. They'd call it the Jolly Roger, though no one ever agreed on where the name came from. Some said it was French Jolie Rouge, the pretty red of blood. Others claimed it was older, from the devil himself, Old Roger. Maybe both, maybe neither. But to Thomas and the crew, it was never meant to be jolly. It was only meant to remind them of the truth, that every voyage is borrowed time. The next day they sighted another ship, a merchantman riding low with cargo. Ward studied her through his glass. "We take her," he said. "No hesitation. We have to keep the sea interested." They raised the new flag. The merchant ship saw it and froze. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the sailors on her deck stop what they were doing. No cannon fire, no chase. The crew simply abandoned their wheel, launched a single rowboat, and vanished into the horizon. By the time the Providence reached her, the deck was empty. Crates of spices, bolts of silk, barrels of water, all untouched. The ship itself was fine, save for a broken rail and a torn sail. "People see what they fear," Ward said quietly. "Sometimes that's enough." They spent 2 days transferring supplies. On the second night, Thomas climbed the mainmast and looked down at the black flag curling in the wind. It seemed alive somehow, folding and breathing with the air. He thought of the men who had fled, of the ones who'd built this merchant ship only to surrender her to shadows. He wondered what stories they would tell about the skull and bones, about the nameless ship that appeared from fog and left only silence behind. Below, Ward watched him from the helm. The lantern light made his face unreadable. "The sea likes stories," he called up. "It just doesn't like to share them." Thomas looked back at the flag once more. It didn't wave proudly. It swayed slowly, like something tired of pretending to be brave. The sound it made was soft, almost human, the sigh of fabric remembering the wind. And that, more than anything else, made him uneasy, because for the first time he realized that the flag wasn't warning others. It was warning them. The black flag had teeth. That's what people said when they saw it for the first time off the coast of Hispaniola. To the merchants, it was a curse. To the Navy, it was an insult. To the sea itself, it was a promise kept. Ward and his crew didn't plan on fame, but fame came for them all the same. By the time they reached Tortuga, every tavern and brothel whispered their name in candlelight. The ship with no king, the flag that watched back. Tortuga was supposed to be a haven, a place where the rules bent like old wood and the law arrived late, if it arrived at all. But when the Providence anchored in the bay, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like something waiting. The island reeked of rum, salt, and smoke. Gulls circled above roofs patched with tin, while music and shouting tangled in the humid air. Men slept in doorways with pistols on their chests. Women leaned from balconies painted the color of sunburn, their laughter brittle as glass. Ward sent Thomas and Maren ashore to find a man named Redden, a broker of sorts. The kind of man who could turn a stolen cargo into silver without asking too many questions. They found him in a low-ceiling tavern called the Widow's Breath, where the candles burned blue and the walls sweated rum. Redden was thin, his beard a dirty constellation across his face. He smiled with all his teeth when he saw them. "You're the ghosts I've been hearing about," he said, waving them closer. "The ones who fly the skull that doesn't grin. You've scared half the Caribbean into prayer." Thomas said nothing. Maren sat across from him, her boots on the table. "We came for trade, not worship." Redden chuckled. "Trade, of course. You've brought something fine, I hear." "Silk," Thomas said, "and spices, enough to keep you sweet for months." "Sweet," Redden leaned forward. "My friends, I'm in the business of silence. Sweetness costs extra." He slid them a small pouch of silver, payment in part, insult in full. Maren's hand went to her knife, but Thomas caught her wrist under the table. "We'll take it," he said. "For now." They left before the rum turned to anger. Outside, the rain had started. A slow, heavy fall that turned the dust to tar. The streets emptied. From the harbor, lightning flashed, painting the masts like bones against the black sky. By the time they reached the ship, Ward was already on deck, the wind clawing at his coat. "Storm coming," he said. "Get her ready." But it wasn't just the weather. Out on the horizon, beneath the low thunder, another light blinked. Lanterns moving information. Warships, at least 3. The English, Thomas asked. Ward nodded once. Word travels faster than wind. Someone sold us for coin. He didn't need to say who. The rain came sideways now, drumming against the deck. The crew ran, tightening ropes, lashing barrels, shouting into the wind. The flag snapped above them, black against lightning, wild and alive. Maren grinned through the rain. Seems the seas picked a side. Ward took the wheel, his hand steady. Then let her see how we hold it. The first cannon shot hit the water 30 yards off their stern, sending a geyser of foam into the air. Thomas felt it in his chest more than in his ears. The deep, hungry sound of something ancient waking. Raise her high, Ward shouted. Let them know who we are. The crew obeyed, and the flag unfurled into the storm. The skull's hollow eyes seemed to flash with each burst of lightning, watching the oncoming fleet without fear, without pity. Another shot, closer this time, splinters of salt and oak raining down. Thomas climbed the rigging, tying down the mainsail, the rain cutting his face. The world was all noise now, thunder, wind, and the scream of ropes pulled to their breaking point. Then, through the chaos, a voice beside him, Maren's, low and clear. Think we'll live to see morning? Thomas looked out at the burning horizon, at the ships creeping closer through the lightning. If we do, he said, I'll tell you what the flag means. She laughed, wild and sharp, and vanished back into the rain. The Providence turned sharply to starboard, catching the wind full in her sails. She flew across the waves like a thing possessed, each roll threatening to split her spine. The warships followed, but the sea had made her choice. The current twisted like an animal, dragging the Providence through the gaps of coral and reef that no navy would dare follow. Behind them, the thunder swallowed the sky. By dawn, the warships were gone. Only the rain remained, falling softer now, washing the blood and salt from the deck. Ward stood by the helm, drenched, smiling faintly. She carried us through, he said. Borrowed waves again. Thomas followed his gaze to the flag, torn at the edges, soaked and heavy, but still there. It hung limp in the morning light, the skull staring down at them, patient, waiting, as if it knew this wasn't victory, just another borrowed reprieve. When they came back to Tortuga, the sea was calm, too calm, the kind that feels like someone holding their breath. The storm had swept half their supplies overboard, and the Providence limped into harbor with patched sails and a hunger that went deeper than food. From the docks, the island looked the same as before. The smoke rising from taverns, the song of fiddles spilling through windows, the smell of fried salt fish and rum. But Thomas felt it immediately, a shift. I followed them now. Conversations stopped when they passed. Their name had spread, and fame, as Ward said, was only another kind of debt. They tied up near a rotting pier, the wood soft underfoot, and made for the market. But the merchants who once smiled now turned away. No one wanted to sell to ghosts, Ward stopped at a stall lined with empty barrels. "Where's Redden?" he asked the vendor. The man's mouth twitched. "Gone." "When?" "Night of the storm," the man said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Took his coin and a fast horse. Said he'd sold too much salt to men who don't drown." Ward gave a slow nod. "So he told them." Thomas frowned. "Told who?" But Ward didn't answer. He just started walking, boots cutting through the mud like a man who already knew what he'd find. They reached the widow's breath again, though half its roof was missing. Inside, only a few drunk sailors and the smell of wet ash remained. Maren found a newspaper, crumpled, soaked, but legible enough. The headline read, "Crown offers pardon for pirate captains. Amnesty for those who kneel." Beneath it, a list of names. Ward's among them. Thomas read it twice, his heart heavy. "A pardon," he said. "They want to forgive us?" Ward smiled without humor. "Forgive, no. That's what forgiveness means when it's offered by men with crowns." He tore the paper in two and tossed it into the gutter. Outside, the rain had started again, thin, mean rain, the kind that doesn't cleanse but stains. They walked toward the fort that sat above the harbor like a vulture's nest. Its cannons pointed at the sea, not to protect the island, but to remind everyone who owned it. At the gates stood a man in a red coat, his uniform crisp even in the damp air. He held a ledger in one hand, a pistol in the other. "Captain Ward," he said, smiling thinly. "We've been expecting you." Ward raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't planning on calling." "Few sinners do," the officer replied. "But the governor insists. There's a price for peace, after all." They were led into the fort, a place of stone and shadow, echoing with the drip of rain through broken ceilings. The governor waited in a room that smelled of brandy and damp parchment. His wig had gone yellow at the edges. He gestured for Ward to sit. "You've caused quite the stir, Captain. 3 ships lost, 2 towns terrified. You understand we can't have that kind of reputation spreading unchecked." Ward didn't sit. "Then stop spreading it." The governor smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "We could, of course, if you serve. Serve. Your ship, your crew, the flag, even if you insist. All under His Majesty's hand. You raid the Spanish, fly the crown's blessing, and in return, freedom, gold, protection." Maren's jaw tightened. Slavery dressed in velvet. The governor ignored her. "Tortuga was built on bargains, Captain. Don't pretend you're above them. Every man here pays a price for harbor." Ward stepped closer, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink. "And what's yours?" The governor's smile wavered. "Mine." Ward leaned in. "A man who serves always belongs to someone. So who do you belong to?" Silence. The rain filled the room. Then the governor said softly, "To whoever wins, Captain. Same as you." Ward turned and left without another word. Outside, the soldiers didn't stop him. Maybe they didn't dare. When they reached the docks again, the crew was waiting. Thomas looked back at the fort's dark outline against the sky. "What now?" Ward looked out to the sea. Now we find the place they say doesn't exist. What place? Ward's eyes were sharp again, burning with something close to hope. The one where no flag flies, no king, no pardon, just sea and wind. The last real harbor. Maren laughed quietly. You mean a myth? Ward nodded. Aye, but even myths need believers. As they prepared to leave, Thomas caught sight of something strange. Carved into one of the dock posts, half hidden by barnacles. A mark. A skull with no jaw, eyes like stars. The same design he had painted weeks ago. He touched it with his thumb. It was old, older than their ship. He didn't tell Ward. Some things he decided were better left as ghosts. That night, they sailed from Tortuga without lights, their black flag furled tight against the mast. The island shrank behind them, its fires fading one by one until the darkness took it whole. For a long while, no one spoke. Then Thomas said quietly, "If the sea has a price, do you think we've already paid it?" Ward didn't answer. He only watched the horizon, where the stars had begun to tremble through the clouds. For 3 days, the Providence sailed east, away from the trade routes, away from every name the sea had ever given to land. The waves changed first. They grew long and low, like the slow breathing of something asleep. The wind lost its warmth, and the sky took on a color Thomas had never seen before, a kind of bruised silver that made the water look like metal. Nobody said it aloud, but they all felt it. They were leaving the world they knew. On the morning of the 4th day, Ward called Thomas to his cabin. The room smelled of salt and damp wood. Maps were pinned to every surface, on the walls, the table, even the ceiling. Each one was slightly different, as though drawn by people who had seen the same dream but remembered it differently. At the center of the table lay a new chart, small enough to fit in a palm, its edges burned and curling. Ward nodded toward it. "Found this in the governor's library before we left." Thomas frowned. "You stole it." "I borrowed it," Ward said, "like everything else." He pushed the chart closer. It showed a stretch of ocean with no names, no coordinates, no compass rose, only a faint, spiraling line leading toward a single black mark in the middle. At the bottom, in ink faded by salt and time, someone had written 2 words, "No return." Thomas traced the spiral with his finger. "You think it's real?" Ward's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "I think someone wanted it forgotten, which usually means it's worth remembering." He opened the drawer beside him and pulled out the broken compass, the one that had followed them since the mist. The needle spun lazily, then slowed, tilting east, exactly along the line of the spiral. Thomas felt his stomach turn. "It's pointing to it." Ward smiled. "Then that's where we're going." Outside, the sea moaned against the hull like a warning. By evening, the wind had shifted again. The crew felt it before they saw it. The air growing heavy, the ropes trembling as though something beneath the water was moving with them. The gulls had vanished days ago. Even the stars seemed uncertain, their reflections wavering and distorted in the waves. Maren approached Ward at the helm. "We're chasing ghosts again, aren't we?" Ward didn't look at her. "Ghosts don't leave maps." She stared at him for a long moment. Maybe they leave traps. The next day, they passed a derelict longboat, floating aimlessly. No flag, no crew. Only a single object inside. A glass bottle sealed with black wax. Thomas fished it out with a gaff and broke the wax. Inside, a scrap of parchment, soaked but legible enough to read. Do not follow the east wind. It remembers what we forget. No signature, no explanation. They burned it that night, and no one spoke of it again. Still, Thomas couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ship sounded wrong, like whispers behind the walls. Once, he thought he heard singing. The same low, mournful tune they'd heard from the borrowed waves before she vanished. He climbed to the deck, barefoot and quiet. The sea was black glass beneath him, reflecting the moon in perfect, unbroken circles. And there, on the horizon, something glowed, a thin line of pale light stretching like a scar across the dark. "Ward," Thomas called softly. The captain was already awake. He stepped beside him, eyes fixed on the same horizon. "There it is," he said. "The edge." Thomas swallowed. Edge of what? Ward didn't answer. By dawn, the light had spread, shimmering across the sea like a path. The compass needle shook violently, then steadied, pointing straight ahead. Ward turned to the crew. "Set every sail. We're close now." Maren hesitated. "And if there's no coming back?" Ward's voice was calm. "Then we'll find whatever's been waiting for those who try." Thomas looked again at the glowing horizon. Pulsed faintly, like something alive. For the first time, he wondered if the stories of the world ending in endless water had been wrong. Maybe it didn't end. Maybe it began. That night, as he stood watch, he found the map again in his pocket, though he hadn't taken it from Ward's cabin. He unfolded it in the lantern light and realized something new. The spiral wasn't a path. It was a whirlpool, and at its center, instead of a mark, there was now a faint symbol. A skull without a jaw, its eyes shaped like stars. The night they entered the glowing waters, the Providence seemed to sigh beneath them, wood creaking like bones in the dark. The air smelled different here. Metallic, cold, and sharp as if the sea itself had teeth. Every wave caught the pale light, illuminating the hull in faint silver, as though the ocean were trying to show them something long forgotten. Thomas stood at the bow, gripping the railing, staring down into the strange, moving glow beneath the surface. The water shifted in patterns that reminded him of constellations, yet the stars above didn't match them. He leaned closer, feeling a pull in his chest, a whispering tug as if the waves themselves remembered him. Maren joined him silently. "Feels alive, doesn't it?" she said, "as if it's waiting to recognize us." Thomas didn't answer. He couldn't. Every wave seemed to ripple with echoes of the past, shadows of ships, the faint outlines of decks and sails, and the ghostly shimmer of men staring up from below. They weren't real. He knew that. And yet, in the corner of his mind, a voice whispered that some part of them had been waiting. Ward emerged from the helm, the lantern light casting shadows across his face. He didn't look surprised. He rarely did. "The sea remembers," he said. "Everything. Every ship, every man who fell, every coin lost overboard. And sometimes it chooses to show you." Thomas glanced at him. "Show us what?" Ward turned the compass over in his hand. The needle was spinning fast now, wildly, until it suddenly locked in place, pointing straight into the heart of the glowing water. "Truth," he said, "or something like it." The crew grew restless. Briggs muttered about curses. Some of the younger sailors stared into the water as if hypnotized. Maren tightened her grip on her knife, standing near Thomas, eyes scanning the horizon. Even the gulls had vanished, leaving the sky empty, the wind muted. By midnight, the first figures appeared in the water, faint, silver silhouettes of long-lost ships. Thomas thought he saw the borrowed waves, her masts broken, ghostly, bobbing lightly as if nothing had ever happened. There were ships without names, captains with no faces, cargoes of treasures lost to time. All of them swirled in a slow, endless dance beneath the surface. The water rippled, and the ghostly ships seemed to acknowledge the Providence, turning slightly in their path. Thomas felt his stomach drop. The sea was alive in a way he had never imagined, keeping memories of every soul that had ever dared to cross it. Ward spoke again, low and deliberate. "Men say the ocean forgets nothing. That's wrong. It remembers too much. Every time a ship sinks, it buries the story, but it never lets the story go. You want to borrow a ship? The sea remembers you'll have it, but you'll pay when it calls it back." Thomas shivered. He thought of the burned ship, of the longboat in the fog, of the borrowed waves. Each was a memory of something borrowed, something owed. Maren whispered beside him, "So the compass, it's not just pointing the way, it's asking for payment." Ward didn't answer. He didn't need to. The needle quivered slightly, then steadied toward a large spiral forming in the water ahead. A whirlpool glowing faintly like the heart of the sea itself. The crew fell silent as the Providence drew closer. Thomas could see shapes moving within the whirlpool. Ships of every kind, some broken, some whole, all swirling together. The water hissed and pulsed, alive with memory. A soft chant seemed to rise from the depths, faint and mournful. It was neither wind nor wave, but a sound Thomas felt in his bones. He turned to Maren. "Do you hear that?" She nodded, pale in the lantern light. "It's the sea speaking, or remembering, maybe both." Ward moved to the bow, standing perfectly still. "We're crossing into the heart," he said. "Nothing comes back the same." Thomas's stomach churned. Fear, awe, and something he couldn't name twisted together. He realized that every ship, every life lost, every treasure swallowed by the waves was here, swirling, waiting, remembering. And now they had come to join it. The compass spun wildly again, the needle pointing straight into the spiral. Thomas felt the pull, a tug on his chest, as if the ocean were reaching out, testing him. The Providence tilted into the current. Every plank groaned, every rope strained. The glow beneath them grew brighter. The voices of lost sailors whispered in the wind. The skull on their flag seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, watching, waiting. And in that moment, Thomas understood. The sea didn't just remember ships. It remembered debts, and every debt had to be paid. The whirlpool loomed ahead, a living spiral of pale light in the black water, stretching wider than any Thomas had ever seen. The Providence tilted, groaning as if she, too, sensed the weight of what lay beneath. The compass quivered violently, spinning faster and faster, until Ward caught it and held it steady, pointing straight into the heart of the spiral. Thomas climbed to the mainmast, eyes wide. The water churned, glowing with faint silver shapes. Ships, wrecks, cargo, and shadowy figures moving beneath the surface. It was like the memory of every voyage ever lost, gathered and turned into a single, breathing thing. He swallowed hard, realizing that the sea wasn't just alive, it was conscious. Maren joined him silently, boots cold and wet on the wood. "What do you think it wants?" she asked, her voice barely above the wind. Ward's reply was calm, almost reverent. "Not what we want, what we owe." The closer they got, the more the glow intensified, the shapes below sharpening into forms Thomas recognized. The borrowed waves shimmered briefly, masts intact but ghostly, her deck covered in silver light. He could see shadows of her old crew moving, rowing silently, staring toward him with empty eyes. Then she vanished, absorbed back into the whirlpool's pulse, leaving only the memory of her motion. The water hissed and shimmered like fire, and suddenly the spiral's center revealed itself. Not a void, but a massive circular structure beneath the waves. Thomas squinted through the glow. The form looked like a sunken city, carved from coral and black stone, with towers rising like skeletal fingers. The current swirled around it, carrying the shapes of lost ships in a slow, hypnotic dance. "Some say it's a trap," Maren whispered. "A place no one leaves alive." Ward didn't flinch. "Or a library. Every ship, every man who ever vanished, their stories are stored here. Only those who dare cross the spiral may read them." Thomas felt a pull stronger than the wind in their sails, like gravity bending toward the center. The compass trembled violently, then pointed straight down. He realized with a chill that the needle wasn't pointing north anymore. It was pointing to the center of this memory itself. The crew worked in silence, adjusting sails and lines as the water's rhythm pulled them closer. It was easier to move than he expected. The current was oddly predictable, like the sea wanted them to arrive. Yet every man on deck could feel the weight of something immense pressing down, an awareness that the ocean remembered every betrayal, every theft, every act of courage and cowardice ever committed on its surface. Then the first shadow broke the water, a ghostly figure, neither ship nor man, floating above the whirlpool. It was humanoid, dressed in tattered naval coats, carrying a lantern that glowed like the whirlpool itself. Thomas froze. The figure pointed toward them, and in the strange light, Thomas saw that its face was entirely blank, featureless. Yet he felt its gaze pierce him nonetheless. Ward's voice was quiet but carried over the wind. "We are not here to fight it. We are here to see." Thomas's stomach twisted. "See what?" "The truth," Ward said. "Everything pirates thought they knew. Everything we've borrowed. It's here." The lantern-bearing figure drifted closer, and Thomas noticed other shapes behind it. Shadows of captains, sailors, and entire crews long forgotten. They moved without sound, their motions deliberate and slow, like dancers in an endless ritual. The whirlpool's glow pulsed rhythmically, almost breathing, and Thomas realized that it wasn't just a collection of memories. It was sentient. The water itself remembered, weighed actions, and now, as they approached, it was judging them. Ward stepped forward, leaning on the railing. Every pirate owes something to the sea. Some debts are coinable, some are blood, some are simply stories. If we wish to borrow its secrets, we must be willing to pay in full. Thomas glanced at Maren. She swallowed hard, eyes wide, staring down into the spiraling glow below. He looked at the black flag above them. The skull with star-shaped eyes seemed alive, twisting slightly in the wind, almost nodding. Then the first ship from the spiral broke the water fully. A massive galleon, spectral yet intact, moving as if in water and air at once. Its sails were torn, yet it glided toward them, silent, immense, carrying the weight of centuries. Thomas's mouth went dry. Is it alive?" Ward shook his head slowly. "It doesn't live. It remembers." The Providence drew closer to the center. The whirlpool's glow enveloped them, the ghostly galleon following in perfect synchronization. Thomas felt the pull of the spiral in his chest, the tug of every story buried beneath the waves. He realized that if they crossed fully, there would be no turning back. The compass quivered violently one last time, then pointed directly down. Thomas took a deep breath. Ward's voice cut through the tension, calm and resolute. "We go forward, into what the sea keeps, into the stories it will never forget. And if it chooses, it may let us return." Thomas gripped the railing as the Providence began its slow descent toward the center of the glowing spiral. Every plank groaned, every rope strained. The water beneath pulsed with a heartbeat older than any man aboard. And somewhere deep below, the sea began to whisper their names. The Providence drifted deeper into the spiral's glow, the water beneath them shimmering like liquid silver. Every plank of the deck vibrated faintly, as though the ship itself could hear the murmurs rising from the depths. The glow pulsed rhythmically, soft and insistent, almost like a heartbeat, and Thomas realized that the ocean wasn't just remembering, it was speaking. It started as whispers, faint at first, carried up from the depths through the keel. Thomas pressed his ear to the wood and shivered. They weren't random sounds. They were voices, voices of men and women, long gone, their speech broken but urgent. Some shouted warnings, some whispered names, some muttered in languages Thomas didn't recognize. Maren stood beside him, pale, gripping the railing. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "I do," Thomas said, his voice trembling. "It's calling." Ward emerged from the helm, silent as always, eyes narrowed at the spiral below. "Listen carefully," he said. Not every voice belongs to the dead. Some belong to the debt they left behind. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into fragments Thomas could understand. Do not sail east. The sea remembers your lies. He took what was not his. The compass always asks for payment. It was as if the ocean itself had gathered the sins of every sailor, every pirate, and every shipwrecked crew into a single memory. The voices were not only stories, they were judgments, warnings, confessions, and regrets, all intertwined. Thomas could make out names. Some he recognized from tales he had heard in Tortuga. Pirates who vanished without a trace, ships swallowed by storms, captains whose greed had betrayed them. Others were unfamiliar, yet their fear was palpable, their voices trembling as if still caught in the moment of their deaths. Maren's hand brushed his arm. It's like they're alive in some way. They're watching us. Not watching, Ward corrected. Judging, learning, remembering. If we wish to pass through, we must prove ourselves worthy. Or at least, unworthy enough to be spared. Thomas turned to him. How do we do that? Ward didn't answer. He never did. Instead, he lowered himself to the deck, resting his palms on the wood and closing his eyes. The wind howled around them, carrying the voices into the sails. Thomas realized that Ward was listening, not to the words themselves, but to the rhythm, the pauses, the weight of each memory. The sea pulsed beneath them, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to synchronize with every heartbeat on board. Suddenly, a loud, mournful cry erupted from the depths. Thomas staggered, clutching the railing. It sounded like a man screaming underwater, yet there was no struggle, no bubble, just an endless, echoing anguish. One by one, the crew began to hear their own memories reflected back. A sailor whispered about a ship he abandoned. Another muttered a lie he had told his captain. Each voice, each confession, was drawn from the water, rippling up into reality. Thomas's own memories surfaced unbidden. Times he had taken what wasn't his, small betrayals, moments of cowardice. Each one came with a weight, pressing against him like the hull of the Providence itself. He realized that the sea remembered everything, even what men thought they had buried deep. Maren gripped his arm. "It's testing us," she said. "It knows everything we've done." Ward finally spoke, voice calm but edged with steel. "The sea doesn't forgive. It only remembers, and it allows passage only to those willing to confront it. Face it and you may survive. Deny it and it will take what you owe." The whispers began to form words more clearly now, almost like a chant. Debt, lies stolen, claimed, owed truth, remembered. The glow beneath the hull intensified, enveloping the Providence in silver light, so bright it reflected off the sails like spectral fire. The compass trembled violently, the needle spinning before locking toward the center of the whirlpool. Thomas looked down into the water and gasped. The spiral was no longer just a swirl of memory. It had become a mirror, reflecting the crew's fears, desires, and secrets back at them. The spectral outlines of ships moved in and out of the silver haze, forming shapes and patterns Thomas couldn't fully comprehend. Each one seemed alive, pulsating with the weight of its story. Ward's voice cut through the rising roar of the sea. "Hold fast. They will try to sway you, tempt you, frighten you. The spiral shows what you've taken, what you've borrowed, what the sea demands in return. Only by facing it can we pass." Thomas swallowed hard, staring into the depths. Every memory he had tried to bury, the failures, the lies, the small cruelties, were now visible in the water, laid bare. He felt as if the ocean had reached into his chest and turned his heart inside out. Maren tightened her grip on his arm. "Do you think we can survive this?" Thomas shook his head, though he wasn't sure if he meant it as reassurance or admission. "I don't know, but I do know we have to try." Above them, the black flag flapped in the wind, the skull with star-shaped eyes catching the pale glow. It seemed to pulse in time with the sea, alive with awareness. The ship trembled under them, but Ward held the wheel steady, guiding them forward. The voices of the dead swirled around them, chanting, whispering, judging. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, Thomas knew the spiral awaited, ready to reveal its secret or to claim them forever. The Providence moved slowly toward the center of the spiral, the glow beneath them bright enough to reflect off every mast and rope. The whispers grew louder, swirling around the crew like a living wind. Thomas could feel the memories of every ship, every lost sailor, pressing on him, tugging at his thoughts, almost tangible. And then they saw it. A figure rising from the center of the whirlpool, massive and impossibly tall. It wasn't a ship, nor a man, nor anything Thomas had seen before. Its form shimmered like water and shadow combined, constantly shifting yet undeniably solid. Eyes, or what passed for eyes, glowed faintly, deep and endless, reflecting the history of the sea itself. Ward leaned forward, one hand on the railing. "There," he said quietly, "the keeper." The keeper didn't speak at first. It simply watched, its presence pressing down on the Providence, making every plank of wood tremble. Thomas felt his heart pound, though his body was strangely calm. The whispers grew into a low hum, almost musical, carrying fragments of stories he had never known. Sailors dying on reefs, captains surrendering to storms, crews mutinying, treasures lost and found again, lives forgotten and remembered. Then, at last, the keeper spoke, not in words, but in a voice that Thomas felt in his chest, vibrating like the sea itself. "You have come as many have before. You sail on waves borrowed from memory, carrying debts unpaid. Tell me, why do you enter my spiral?" Ward's voice was steady. "We seek what is hidden. We sail for truth." The keeper's form rippled. "Truth is not what men seek. They seek stories. They seek power. They seek names remembered in the mouths of others. You too sail on borrowed waves. What will you leave for me to remember?" Thomas shivered. The sea had always demanded something, but he had never imagined it would speak directly. We want to understand," he said almost unconsciously. To know the stories the sea keeps, the debts it carries. The keeper's glow intensified. Many enter to take, few enter to listen. The spiral shows everything, and it takes everything. Your memories, your sins, your lies. They will all be mine if you cannot pay. Yet, there is a way to pass. Ward's eyes narrowed. And what is that way? The keeper extended what seemed like a hand, long, made of flowing water and shadow. You must offer a story, one true story, one that has never been claimed by the sea, one that bears weight enough to balance your debts. Only then may the spiral release you. Thomas glanced at Ward, then at Maren. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. What story could they give that the sea hadn't already claimed? Every theft, every act of piracy, every lie and betrayal, they were all here, remembered and echoed in the glow below. Ward spoke quietly. We have one, and it begins with the ship we took from the fog, the borrowed waves. Maren's eyes widened. You mean we tell her story? Ward nodded. The story of what we borrowed, what we lost, what we tried to return. The truth of the compass, the logbook, the ghost ship. It is ours to tell and ours alone. The keeper's glow pulsed in acknowledgement. Then speak, and let the sea decide if it will remember you lightly or for eternity. Thomas felt a shiver pass through him. The whispers of the dead hushed, as if the ocean itself leaned in to listen. The wind ceased, leaving only the sound of the waves and the thrum of the ship. Ward began quietly, recounting the story of the borrowed waves. How they found her, the scorched hull, the empty deck, the logbook of a crew long vanished, the strange compass that seemed to follow them across storms and fog. He spoke of the eerie calm of the sea, of their silent journey, of the nights filled with whispers and visions, of what they had learned from the ocean itself. Thomas added details he had seen, felt, and heard. Maren's insight, the strange glow, the voices that called their names, the memories of the dead that they had glimpsed. Even Maren spoke reluctantly, adding her own observations and truths. The fear, the exhilaration, the debts they already owed and could not escape. The keeper listened in silence, its glow pulsing with each word, each confession, each memory offered. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the glow shifted brighter now, swirling in patterns that Thomas could not understand. The whispers rose again, but this time not in accusation. They were approving, acknowledging, welcoming. The keeper's voice came once more, resonating deep within the chest. You have offered a story that belongs to you alone. The spiral accepts it. Your passage is granted. Remember, however, all that is borrowed must someday be returned. Sail onward, and the sea will continue to watch. Ward exhaled, straightening his back. Then we pass. The whirlpool's glow softened, the water around the Providence calming as if a breath had been released. The spectral ships beneath the surface drifted gently, acknowledging them before receding into the depths. The keeper faded into shadow, leaving only the vast, silver-lit water stretching endlessly before them. Thomas looked at the compass. It had finally stilled, pointing steadily forward. The spiral's pull was gone, but the memory remained, etched into the ship, the crew, and himself. Maren's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "We've crossed it. We survived." After they had passed the spiral, the sea seemed to exhale, leaving the Providence gliding across glassy waves that reflected the dawn in pale, silver light. For a while, it seemed that nothing could touch them. No storm, no pursuing ship, no whispers from below. Yet the crew felt an unease they could not name, as though something had shifted inside the compass itself. Thomas pulled it from his coat pocket, staring at the brass needle. It was perfectly still, pointing due east, but it no longer felt like a simple tool. It hummed faintly in his hand, a vibration that traveled up his arm and settled deep in his chest. "Feels wrong," he said to Ward as he handed the compass across. Ward turned it over, examining the edges, the tiny inscriptions no one else noticed. "It's more than a compass," he said. "It knows. It remembers. It chooses the course for those who sail it. And it has a memory older than most crews aboard the Providence." Thomas swallowed. "You mean it knows about the spiral?" Ward nodded. "It led us there, not by chance. It listens to the sea, to the wind, to the depths beneath the waves. It guided us because it knows what the ocean demands." Maren leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "So what happens now? We follow it blindly." Ward's eyes met hers, sharp and unyielding. "We don't follow it blindly. We follow it carefully. Every choice it gives carries weight. Every turn, every mark on the horizon. Decisions not ours, but ours to obey." Thomas turned the compass over in his hand again, feeling the hum under his fingers. He realized that it was almost alive, not just guiding them. It remembered every course taken, every lie, every theft, every encounter with the sea. It was a ledger that moved, that whispered, that demanded. The first sign of its influence came the next day. The wind shifted unexpectedly, carrying a thick mist that rolled over the deck in slow, suffocating waves. The stars disappeared, leaving only gray above, and Thomas felt the compass pulse against his palm. He glanced at Ward. "It wants us somewhere," he said. "Where?" Maren asked. Ward shrugged, though the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "Somewhere the sea thinks we need to be. The compass doesn't lie, but it doesn't explain either." Hours later, a low rumble reached them from beneath the waves. The crew froze, eyes darting toward the water that churned without wind. The compass hummed, louder now, vibrating through Thomas's fingers like a heartbeat not his own. From the mist emerged a small, wooden ship, half submerged, torn and blackened by fire. No flag, no crew, only the charred remains of a deck, empty bottles, and a logbook floating alongside it. The compass needle pointed straight at it. Thomas's stomach twisted. "That can't be real." Ward shook his head slowly. "It is. The compass has remembered it for us. Some ship borrowed too much from the sea and could not repay. The spiral sent its memory forward so we could witness it." The crew hesitated, Briggs muttered, "We should just leave it. Let the sea keep its ghosts." Ward's voice was firm. "We cannot. The compass does not point to what can be ignored. It points to what must be faced." Thomas stepped closer to the water, staring at the ghostly ship. Its splintered hull seemed almost to breathe, rising slightly on phantom waves. He could see names scratched into the deck, etched by sailors long gone. Every mark on that wood felt alive, charged with memory. Maren touched his shoulder. "And if it's a trap?" Thomas swallowed. "Then we face it anyway, because the compass chose it. The sea chose it. And I think we've learned that nothing the sea chooses is ever random." Ward ordered the crew to prepare ropes and lines. The Providence drew alongside the burned vessel carefully, every motion deliberate. The compass pulsed in Thomas's hand, a quiet insistence that guided their every movement. As Thomas leaned over the side, he saw it clearly. A set of journals, ink blurred by salt water, pages stuck together, yet somehow readable. Each page chronicled the crew's misdeeds, their greed, and the debts they left unpaid to the sea. It was as if the ship itself had recorded its own demise, and now it demanded acknowledgement. Ward's voice broke the silence. "We read it. We acknowledge it. Then we decide if the sea allows us to keep moving. Nothing borrowed is free, and the compass remembers what we owe." Thomas took a deep breath. He had thought the compass was guiding them to treasure, to knowledge, or even to freedom. But now he understood it wasn't guiding them to gain. It was guiding them to responsibility, to the debts of the past, and to the truth that the sea never forgets, and it never forgives lightly. The first page separated under Thomas's fingers, dripping with salt water. He began to read aloud, and in that moment, the Providence felt smaller, the ocean vast, and the compass in his hand heavier than any anchor he had ever held. The air was thick with salt and silence. The burned ship creaked as if it remembered pain, as if its timbers had not yet accepted their death. The Providence floated beside it, tethered by ropes that looked far too fragile for the weight of memory between them. Thomas knelt beside the ruined logbook, the pages soft and blackened at the edges. Every word bled salt. The ink had spread like veins across the parchment, but the letters still told a story, jagged, broken, desperate. He began to read aloud. "The sea gave us wind when none would blow. The sea gave us prey when none would sail. The sea gave us luck when none was deserved. We promised nothing. We paid nothing. Now it comes to collect." Maren stood behind him, her voice barely above a whisper. They knew. They knew they were taking too much. Ward said nothing. He only watched, his jaw set tight, his eyes like stone. Thomas turned the page. The next entry was dated only 2 days later. "The compass no longer points to north, points home, or so we thought. But home is not where we began. It is where we will end. We sail in circles, the stars gone, the sea unending." A chill ran through the crew. They glanced at their own compass, still glowing faintly in Thomas's palm, the same quiet hum pulsing beneath his skin. He read the final entry, the letters carved deep into the page as if written by a shaking hand. Do not pray for calm. The calm is what kills. The storm is mercy. The sea forgives only in motion. Thomas lowered the book. The burned ship groaned, its hull shifting against the current. He could almost feel the weight of those words pressing against his ribs. Maren looked out over the black water. They tried to cheat the sea, she said. Took too much, promised nothing, and thought they'd escape the cost. Ward finally spoke, his voice low and grim. Every pirate believes they can bargain with the sea. Take her treasures, avoid her storms, and live forever on borrowed wind. But every wind runs out eventually. A gust swept across the deck, sharp and sudden, as if in agreement. The ropes tying them to the burned ship strained. Thomas stood, staring into the charred hull. The longer he looked, the more he saw. Faces in the wood grain, faint, shifting expressions that blinked and disappeared. He stumbled back. There are eyes, he whispered, watching us. Maren stepped closer. She saw them too, countless faint imprints of faces. Sailors caught mid-scream, their features half consumed by the fire, half preserved by salt. Ward's voice dropped to a whisper. The sea remembers its thieves. The wind shifted again, carrying a sound across the water, low, rhythmic, like oars cutting through the waves. But there were no boats nearby, no crew in sight. The sound came from beneath the burned ship. Thomas peered over the side. The water shimmered faintly, and for a moment, he thought he saw movement. A dozen figures beneath the hull rowing in silence. Their bodies glowed faintly blue, their faces calm, their eyes empty. They rowed in slow unison, as though pulling the wreck across eternity. He froze. Ward, there are men under her. Ward didn't look surprised. The crew, still paying their passage. The ghostly figures rowed faster as the mist thickened, the burned ship creaking as if it wanted to follow. The ropes connecting them to the Providence strained again, fibers snapping one by one. Maren's voice trembled. Cut the lines. Ward's hand hovered over his sword. Not yet. The compass pulsed once in Thomas's palm. Then again, faster, more insistent. Captain, he said quietly, it wants us to leave. Now. The burned ship shuddered, its deck splitting open as black water gushed from its seams. The ghostly oarsmen below began to rise, their heads breaking the surface. Thomas saw their faces clearly, young and old, scarred and smooth, all marked by the same expression. Not anger, not pain, but weariness. Ward drew his blade. Cut it. Maren slashed through the ropes. The Providence lurched backward as the current released them. The burned ship sank almost immediately, swallowed by the sea in a single enormous breath. The oarsmen vanished with it, their faint glow snuffed out. Silence returned. Only the compass moved now, its needle spinning once before settling north again. Ward exhaled slowly. It showed us what happens when a crew forgets the price of what they've borrowed. Thomas looked down at the logbook in his hands. The ink had begun to fade, the words dissolving into the paper like the sea reclaiming its story. Maren crossed her arms. Then what's it showing us next? Ward turned toward the horizon, where a thin red glow burned through the mist. Whatever it is, he said, it's still part of the sea's memory, and we're still in it. Thomas tucked the fading logbook inside his coat, though he could still feel it humming faintly, like the compass. As the Providence sailed away, the surface of the water rippled once, and for a moment, Thomas thought he saw the burned ship again, intact this time, sails full, crew alive. But when he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the endless silver sea. He looked down at the compass once more. The hum matched his heartbeat exactly. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew what it meant. The sea had begun to remember him. The morning after the burned ship sank, the sea was unnaturally still. No gulls, no wind, no sound but the faint groaning of the Providence as it rocked in a motionless swell. The horizon glowed pale and endless, yet something about it felt wrong. Too calm, too deliberate, like the surface of a mirror that could shatter at any breath. Thomas stood at the bow, the compass in his hand. Its hum was different now, quieter, slower, as though it were breathing with him. He turned it over, tracing the small scratches along the brass rim. But this morning there was something new. A mark, faint but undeniable, etched into the metal overnight. A small spiral, identical to the one they had seen in the glowing sea. He frowned and rubbed it with his thumb, but the mark didn't fade. In fact, the harder he pressed, the warmer it became, until the metal pulsed gently against his skin, almost alive. Maren's voice came from behind him, soft and wary. "It's changing, isn't it?" He didn't answer. She stepped closer, the deck creaking beneath her boots. "You've been holding it too long. You should give it back to Ward. It's starting to claim you." Thomas looked up. "Claim me?" Her expression was grim. "You felt it, didn't you? The sea doesn't forget anyone who listens too closely. It marked the borrowed waves. It marked the burned ship. It marked Ward long before any of us knew." Thomas turned sharply. "What do you mean, marked Ward?" But before she could reply, the captain himself appeared from the shadows near the mainmast. His voice was calm, though his eyes looked hollow in the gray light. "She means the sea never gives its gifts freely," Ward said. "Not to me, not to any of us." Thomas noticed the faint glimmer of silver veins along Ward's wrist, like thin lines of light running beneath his skin. They pulsed in rhythm with the waves. "What happened to you?" Thomas asked. Ward smiled faintly. "The first time I followed the compass, I thought it was leading me to gold. Instead, it led me to a storm that lasted 6 days and nights. My ship was torn apart. I was the only one who lived. When I woke, the compass was still in my hand, and this mark was under my skin." He raised his arm, and Thomas saw it clearly now. A spiral faintly glowing, just like the one on the compass. "It doesn't kill," Ward continued softly. "It remembers. It makes you part of the sea's story. But every story has an end." A gust of wind rose suddenly, snapping the sails taut. The sea began to stir, the calm surface rippling with slow, deliberate waves. Thomas slipped the compass back into his coat, but he could still feel its pulse against his chest. Later that night, as the crew slept in uneasy silence, Thomas woke to the sound of whispering. At first, he thought it was the wind through the rigging, but then he realized the words were forming. Thomas, the sea remembers you. Borrowed, borrowed, borrowed. He stumbled out onto the deck, heart hammering. The ocean was glowing faintly again, thin veins of silver light threading through the waves. He looked down at his hands and froze. The same faint light glowed beneath his skin. It pulsed once, then again in time with the compass's heartbeat. He clutched the railing, breath ragged. The sea below seemed to respond, glowing brighter where his shadow fell. For a moment, he thought he saw faces beneath the surface. Eyes opening, watching, waiting. Not yet, a voice said softly behind him. Ward stood in the doorway to the captain's quarters, coat half buttoned, eyes reflecting the silver light. It's begun, he said. The sea's taken notice of you. Thomas shook his head. What does it want from me? The same thing it wants from all who sail too far, Ward replied. It wants a keeper, someone to carry its stories, someone who listens. I don't want that. Ward gave a faint, tired smile. Neither did I. The wind died again, leaving the sails limp and the water flat. Thomas felt his heartbeat slow, the glow under his skin fading to a dull shimmer. For a moment, he thought it had stopped, until he realized it hadn't vanished. It had sunk deeper. The next morning, the mark was gone from his skin. But when he looked in the compass, he saw his reflection flicker, replaced for just an instant by something else. Something older, wearing his face but with eyes the color of the deep. He dropped it, and the metal rang against the deck. Maren picked it up slowly, holding it away from her body. You can't keep it anymore, she said. Thomas didn't argue, but he noticed that the hum hadn't stopped. It was still inside him now, faint but steady, as if the compass didn't need to be held to remember him. Ward's voice carried from the quarterdeck, sharp and certain. We sail south. The compass is finished with us for now, but the sea isn't. Thomas looked out at the endless horizon. The light of dawn touched the water, and for a moment, the reflection of the sky looked like a great spiral spreading across the world. He felt it then. Not fear, not awe, but something quieter and far more dangerous. The understanding that the sea had chosen him. The further south they sailed, the stranger the sea became. The water darkened until it looked almost black, swallowing reflections. The wind carried no scent of salt or shore, just a heavy stillness that clung to the skin, damp and electric. Even the stars above seemed unfamiliar, rearranged into patterns no one could name. Thomas spent most nights awake now. He could hear the ship's creaks and sighs as if they were breathing. Every sound had meaning. Every ripple in the water whispered something too low for the others to hear. He tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself it was exhaustion, but the whispers always found him again. Below, listen, remember. One night, When even the lanterns flickered weakly against the fog, Thomas went out to the stern, where the ship's wake glowed faintly with blue light. It looked like a trail of ghost fire stretching behind them, endless and quiet. He leaned over the railing, staring down. The glow moved strangely, pulsing, twisting, as if following the rhythm of his breath. Then it began to take shape. A face, not clear, not solid, but enough for him to see eyes. Pale, distant eyes looking up through the dark. Thomas stumbled back, heart racing. "Ward!" he called out. The captain appeared almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting. He didn't even look surprised. "You saw it, didn't you?" Thomas nodded. "What is it?" Ward's gaze drifted toward the glowing trail. "The sea has begun speaking to you properly now, just showing you what it remembers. The faces you see aren't ghosts. They're echoes. Echoes of what? Of everyone who's ever listened." Thomas swallowed hard. "Then why me?" Ward turned to face him, his eyes hollow but steady. "Because you heard the sea before the compass chose you. I saw it in you the day you joined the crew. You looked at the waves like you already understood their language." Maren had been listening from the steps below the quarterdeck. "That's madness," she said. "The sea doesn't talk. It swallows, it takes, it drowns. But it doesn't whisper." Ward didn't answer. He only looked at her for a long moment and said softly, "Then why does it keep answering him?" The silence that followed felt heavy, pressing down on the deck, on their lungs. That night, Thomas tried to sleep, but his dreams were filled with the same voice that whispered from the water. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was his own, older, slower, calling from beneath the surface. "The compass is only the key," it said. "You are the lock." He woke gasping. His skin was cold, damp with seawater, though his hammock was dry. The next morning, the crew avoided him. They whispered that they'd seen him walking the deck in his sleep, staring out at the horizon, murmuring things none of them could understand. Even Maren wouldn't meet his eyes. He found her later near the bow, sharpening her knife. "You think I'm cursed," he said quietly. "I think the sea's already decided what you are," she answered. "And that scares me more than any curse." Thomas looked out over the endless water. "I didn't ask for this. No one ever does," she said. "Not even Ward." As if summoned by his name, the captain appeared from below deck. His face looked pale, his expression grim. "We've reached it," he said. "Reached what?" Thomas asked. "The place the compass was leading us to all along. The end of maps." He pointed toward the horizon. First, Thomas saw nothing. Then, slowly, the mist began to part, revealing something vast and dark rising out of the sea. It wasn't an island. It wasn't even land. It was a ring, a massive spiral of stone and coral circling a pit of water so black it reflected nothing. Waves broke against it, but no sound reached them. It was utterly silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. Thomas felt the pull immediately. The same hum that had lived in the compass now vibrated in his chest, deep and steady, like a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Ward looked at him, "This is where the borrowed waves came to die," he said quietly, "and where the sea chose its next keeper." The crew stood frozen, eyes wide. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Thomas heard it again. "Come closer. We remember you. Finish what was borrowed." He took a step forward, almost without realizing. The air thickened, the deck tilting slightly underfoot. The spiral of stone seemed to grow larger, taller, as if it were alive. The glow beneath the surface brightened until it looked like veins of molten silver running through the black. Ward's voice cut through the stillness. "Do not answer it, Thomas. Once you do, it never lets go." Thomas turned to him, trembling. "But it already has." And for the first time since they'd met, the captain looked afraid. The Providence drifted closer to the edge of the spiral, the water deepening until even the sound of the hull vanished. The sea didn't roar. It didn't crash. It simply waited, and somewhere in that waiting, Thomas realized it wasn't calling him to drown. It was calling him to remember. The Providence drifted forward in silence. The sea around them no longer looked like water. It shimmered like glass, thick and dark, reflecting nothing but its own depths. The spiral of coral and stone towered ahead, vast and ancient, its ridges gleaming faintly with that same soft silver light. Every man on deck had gone quiet. Even the air felt heavy, as though they had sailed not into a place, but into something alive. Thomas stood at the bow, his hands gripping the railing. The hum in his chest had grown stronger, resonating with the spiral below. He could feel it now, not just in his heart, but in his bones. It was the same sound that had haunted his dreams, the same rhythm that pulsed in the compass. Maren approached him, her voice trembling. "Tell me we're not going in there." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The ship was already being pulled toward the spiral, drawn by a current too steady to resist. Ward appeared beside them, coat whipping in the wind. "We don't fight the current," he said quietly. "We follow it. That's the only way the sea will let us leave." Maren stared at him. "You're saying we just let it take us?" Ward nodded once. "If the sea remembers us, we remember it. That's the trade. That's always been the trade." The spiral's center began to shift, revealing a massive whirlpool of perfect symmetry. Slow, deliberate, pulling everything toward its silent heart. But it wasn't chaos. There was no roar of rushing water. It turned like a living thing, smooth, controlled, ancient. Thomas felt the pull intensify, the hum inside him aligning perfectly with the spiral's rhythm. The air buzzed faintly around his ears, carrying words that no one else seemed to hear. "Below. Find what was taken. Give it back." He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the whirlpool. Maren grabbed his arm. "Thomas, don't." But when she touched him, she froze. Her eyes widened, her mouth falling open. "You're cold," she whispered. "You're freezing." Thomas looked down at his hands. They were pale, veins glowing faintly beneath the skin. The mark had returned, spiraling up his wrist like liquid silver. Ward's voice was steady but grave. "He's the one it wants." The crew murmured, stepping back, crossing themselves, whispering prayers to gods they hadn't spoken to in years. Thomas barely heard them. The whispers from the water were louder now, hundreds of voices overlapping in harmony, like a chorus rising from beneath the sea. He could almost make out words, names, fragments of stories. He climbed the railing. "Thomas!" Maren shouted, reaching for him. But before she could grab him, the ship lurched violently forward. The Providence tilted, the bow dipping into the vortex. The crew screamed, clutching ropes and rails, but Thomas didn't move. He turned once toward Ward. "You said the sea wanted a keeper," he said softly. "Then maybe it's time it stopped borrowing and started remembering." And with that, he let go. The sea didn't swallow him. It took him carefully, like something claiming its own. He sank through the surface without a splash, descending into the spiraling light below. The water wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, alive, humming with sound. Shapes swirled around him. Faces, ships, entire memories floating like smoke through the dark. He saw the borrowed waves, the burned ship, sailors from centuries past, all drifting in the same slow orbit around the spiral's heart. At the center of it all was a massive structure of coral and bone, shaped like an open hand reaching upward. Inside the palm burned a soft white light, steady and alive. Thomas drifted closer, the hum inside his chest merging with it until he couldn't tell where his heartbeat ended and the seas began. When he touched the light, the whispers stopped. Everything went still, and then he saw. The sea wasn't a thing. It wasn't just water or waves. It was memory itself. Every story, every life, every stolen moment held in its depths. Every time a sailor had begged for mercy, every ship that had vanished, every voice lost to the deep. They had all been preserved here, circling endlessly, waiting to be remembered. The compass hadn't led him to treasure. It had led him to the heart of all that was forgotten. "You are the key," the voice said again, "and the lock. We remember through you." The light flared, flooding through his body, his mind, every thought dissolving into a single, endless rhythm. Above, on the Providence, the whirlpool slowed. The water began to calm. The ship drifted gently away from the spiral as if released. Maren fell to her knees, staring into the still surface. "Where is he?" she whispered. Ward's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "He's where we all end up, where the sea keeps its stories." She turned to him, tears streaking her face. "Is he dead?" Ward looked out at the horizon. "No, worse. He's remembered." And as the morning sun rose, the sea shimmered with faint, silver spirals, each one fading slowly beneath the waves, until nothing was left but calm water and the endless hum of the world remembering itself. When the sea went still again, it was not peace. It was something heavier, the kind of silence that follows a promise being broken. The Providence drifted on a mirror of black glass. The great spiral behind them was gone, as though it had never been. No wind, no waves, no sound. Even the ropes hung limp, untouched by breeze. The air itself felt like it was holding its breath. Maren stood at the bow, her hands gripping the railing until her knuckles went white. She couldn't stop looking at the place where Thomas had vanished. The water there looked thicker somehow, too dark, too patient. Ward's boots echoed on the deck behind her. "He's not coming back," he said quietly. "You don't know that," she answered, not looking at him. "The sea took him, but it's taken others before and it keeps them," Ward interrupted. His voice wasn't cruel, just tired. "It doesn't return what it owns. It remembers what it likes." Maren turned sharply, anger flashing in her eyes. "Then why let us go?" Ward's gaze drifted toward the horizon. "Because we're part of the story now, and stories need someone to tell them." The wind came back all at once, a low moan that turned the sails and sent the ropes creaking. The ship began to move again, slowly at first, then steady. The crew came stumbling up from below deck, blinking like men waking from a nightmare. "Where are we headed?" one of them asked. Ward didn't answer. He didn't need to. The compass, lying on the deck between them, had begun to glow again. Its needle turned slowly north, then stopped. But something about it had changed. The glass face of the compass was no longer clear. It shimmered faintly, as if a thin layer of mist had formed beneath it. And in that mist, for a single moment, Maren thought she saw a reflection. A face, Thomas's. His eyes were open, calm, distant. He mouthed something, just one word, but she couldn't hear it. Then the image faded, leaving only her own reflection staring back. Maren's voice broke. "Ward, he's alive. I saw him." Ward knelt beside the compass, staring down. "Alive isn't the word I'd use," he said. "But he's not gone either." "What does that mean?" "It means the sea remembered him too well to let him fade." That night, they anchored in a patch of calm water, though none of them could sleep. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the stars above flickered behind thin veils of cloud. Maren sat alone at the stern, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the waves. It should have been peaceful, but the water wasn't right. It shimmered faintly silver where the ship's wake passed. And then she heard it, a single, familiar voice carried by the waves. "Maren!" She froze. The voice was soft, distant, but unmistakable. She leaned over the railing, heart racing. "Thomas!" "Maren, don't be afraid." The words came from below, faint but clear, as if the sea itself were breathing them. "The sea remembers everything, even you." She backed away, shaking her head. "No, no, you're gone." Ward appeared beside her, calm as ever. "He's not gone," he said. "He's part of it now. When the sea speaks, he's what it uses to speak through." The surface of the water rippled again, and for a moment, Maren saw light swirling beneath the hull, thin, glowing spirals like before. But this time they didn't vanish. They followed the ship, keeping pace, twisting gently through the black. Ward looked down at them. "It's guiding us." "Guiding us where?" He paused. "Home, maybe, or to where the story began." Maren didn't believe him. She could feel it. This wasn't a return. It was a continuation. As the night deepened, the air filled with faint, distant humming. It wasn't the wind or the sea. It was a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The same rhythm that used to hum in the compass. It pulsed softly through the deck, through the ropes, through the hearts of everyone aboard. And though no one said it aloud, they all heard the same thing. We remember. We remember. We remember. By dawn, the Providence had drifted into new waters, clear blue, calm, and impossibly still. The sun rose over a horizon they didn't recognize, golden light spilling across the waves. For the first time in weeks, it looked like the world had returned to normal. But when Maren glanced down into the water, her reflection didn't look back. It was Thomas's face staring up at her, eyes silver, calm, and smiling faintly, as if he knew something she didn't. She stepped back, trembling. "Ward?" The captain turned to her, and for the briefest moment, just an instant, she saw it. The same faint silver spiral glowing beneath his skin. And then the wind shifted again, carrying a low whisper across the deck. Thomas's voice, soft and steady. "The story isn't over yet." The Providence sailed on, and somewhere beneath the waves, something vast and ancient turned over in its sleep, remembering. By the third dawn, they began to understand that the world around them was no longer the same one they had left. The wind was softer now, as though it carried voices instead of air. The sea glowed faintly at night even without moonlight, and when the waves broke against the hull, the sound they made wasn't quite the sound of water. It was more like breathing. Slow, patient, endless. The Providence was sailing through something that looked like the ocean, but the crew could feel it in their bones. It wasn't. Maren noticed it first. When she leaned over the railing, she realized she couldn't see the ship's reflection anymore. Only the water itself, clear and deep, like a window. And beneath it, something was watching. It didn't move, didn't rise, it simply waited. When she blinked, it was gone. But every time she looked again, she felt it there. Ward spent his nights on deck now, never sleeping, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He'd stopped using the compass entirely. It no longer pointed north. Instead, its needle spun slowly, endlessly, like it was following something that didn't exist in the world above. The men whispered below deck. Some said they'd heard Thomas's voice in their sleep. Others swore the ship itself was whispering to them through the planks. They weren't wrong. The Providence creaked and groaned with meaning now. Sometimes at night, when the ship shifted, the timbers made sounds that almost formed words. Remember, not lost, still here, and always, always. Thomas's voice beneath it all. Maren tried to shut it out, but she couldn't forget the last thing she'd seen in the water. The faint smile on his face, the calm certainty in his eyes. Ward caught her watching the horizon one evening and said quietly, "You think he's calling you?" She didn't look away. "Isn't he calling you?" Ward smiled faintly. "He's calling all of us. But I think the sea speaks to each of us in a different tongue." He turned his palm upward. The faint silver spiral was still there beneath the skin, glowing softly in the twilight. "This isn't a curse," he said. "It's an invitation. An invitation to what? She asked. To remember. That night, the wind changed again. It came from nowhere, but it carried a scent none of them could name. Salt and smoke and something old, like wet stone. The sea below began to shimmer, and soon, the stars above reflected perfectly in the water, as if the sky had fallen into the waves. Maren stood at the railing, staring down. Her reflection was gone again. In its place was an entire world beneath the surface, ships, cities, faces, all drifting in silence. She felt dizzy, as if the line between sea and sky had disappeared. Ward's voice came from beside her, low and almost reverent. You're seeing the dream. The dream, the sea's other half, he said, where everything it remembers lives on. Every story, every storm, every life taken too soon. It all sinks there. And sometimes, when the sea dreams, it lets us see through it. Maren shook her head. This isn't seeing. This is falling. She turned away, but the image stayed behind her eyes, like an afterimage burned into her vision. She could still see the faint glow of the spiral beneath the waves, turning slowly, endlessly. Later, when the crew slept, she went below deck. The air was damp, heavy with salt. Every plank, every nail felt alive. The faint humming had deepened now. It came from the hull itself, vibrating through the wood like a heartbeat. And beneath that heartbeat, she heard him. Maren, it's not over. The sea remembers what it dreams. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't stop. The voice wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from inside her. When she looked down, she saw faint silver light threading through the veins in her wrists. The same light Thomas had carried. The same mark Ward now bore. She stumbled up to the deck, gasping. Ward, she cried. It's spreading. But Ward was already standing at the helm, eyes distant, fixed on the black horizon. I know, he said. It's waking up. She followed his gaze. The sea ahead was rising, not in waves, but in shapes. Vast, slow-moving forms of light beneath the surface. They moved like whales, but she knew they weren't alive in any way that could be named. The air shimmered, bending. For a moment, she thought she saw something impossible. Land, floating beneath the water. Towers of coral and bone. Ships fused together into impossible shapes. The sea was remembering too much at once. The wind grew colder. The Providence began to tremble, its sails snapping with a sound like thunder. The water itself began to glow brighter, turning the night silver blue. Maren turned to Ward. What's happening? He didn't answer. His eyes were full of light now, glowing faintly like the horizon. It's dreaming out loud. The deck beneath them hummed violently. Every board, every rope, every nail seemed to vibrate with energy. The air shimmered, and then Thomas's voice, louder than before, carried by the wind itself. The sea does not forget. The sea becomes what it remembers. The light flared across the water, and for an instant, the world around them shattered into reflection. Sky below, sea above, everything folding together like the two sides of a mirror closing shut. Maren grabbed the railing, eyes wide, heart hammering. "Ward!" she shouted. But the captain didn't move. He was staring straight ahead, smiling faintly. "He's not gone," he whispered. "He's rewriting it." The world pulsed once, then again, and the Providence sailed straight into the dream.